Hello, Living Water family. I just wanted to share with you just some thoughts about a passage that we're all familiar with, but they're a little different than the things I had noticed or was aware of in this passage before. So I'm going to share, we're going to talk about one story, but there are two stories that are involved. You'll recognize the stories real quick, so it won't take much for you to get to where I'm at. And this is out of Matthew 14, starting in verse 13. And it's the story of the feeding of 5,000. And there is the same story, or a similar story, in Matthew 15, starting in verse 32, of the feeding of 4,000. They're very similar stories. There's some differences, but I think the lesson from each story is the same. And so I'm going to just read out of this one. So now, as you know, Jesus and his disciples had been ministering, and they were tired, they were exhausted. So they get into the boat and they cross the Sea of Galilee and they go out into the countryside where they can be alone and get some rest. However, people who were starving for the teachings of Jesus, starving for the healings that they saw, followed them. Many of them walked around the Sea of Galilee to get to where Jesus was. And so they're out in the middle of the countryside, and so Jesus teaches them and he heals some. But at the end of the day, his disciples are like, hey, we need to send these people home. You know, they don't have enough to eat, and we're far from any village or town. And Jesus says to them, they do not need to go away. This is in verse 16. You give them something to eat. And the disciples, and I got to be honest, if I were in their shoes, I'd be like, what? What are you talking about? It's like, and they said to him, we have here only 5 loaves and 2 fish. And Jesus said, bring those to me. And so he has the people sit down in groups of 50. And imagine this, you know, the scripture says that there were 5,000 men there, and women and children. So if there's 5,000 men and a bunch of them have their wives and their children there too, we could easily be talking about 10,000 people. We don't really know because Scripture doesn't tell us. But we're talking about an awful lot of people to feed with 5 loaves and 2 fish. And his disciples had to think that he was literally out of his mind. I would have. I'd be like, what are you talking about? But if we read the story on, and in the other story of the feeding of the 4,000, it's very similar in the same respect, in that Jesus blesses the loaves and the fish, he breaks the loaves, and then he gives them to his disciples to dispense to the people. After they've dispensed it, people have had enough, they go around and they collect 12 basketfuls. You've heard the story, you all know the story. But here's what I want to point out to you. This is what I want you to see. First of all, the first lesson that I get from this, as I'm looking at this, is that the disciples were exhausted. They'd been ministering to people for days and days on end. They wanted a rest. They wanted a break. They felt inadequate. Here Jesus says, "Oh, you feed them," and they didn't have what it was going to take to minister to these people, in this particular case, to feed these people. But think about us. How often do we look at a situation and think in our heads, I don't have what it takes to minister to these people. I don't have what I need to be able to help these people. I don't have the knowledge. I don't have the skill. I don't have the ability to help these people. And yet Jesus handed it to them and said, hey, feed them. And I think that the lesson that we have to take from that is that no matter how exhausted we are or how inadequate we often feel, we can let those things hinder us from doing the work of the Lord, because ultimately it's really him who's doing the work, not us. We like to think that it's us, but the truth is it's really him. I can't tell you how many times ministering to people when I have felt so inadequate and I don't know what to pray, I don't know what to say to help people, I don't know what thing to do or say, and feeling so inadequate. But I have learned to quiet myself before the Lord in those situations, take a moment and just call out to God and say, show me, Lord, what to do. And I don't think I can count the number of times when the Lord has given me the answer to know how to minister to somebody, to know how to speak to somebody, to know how to deal with a specific situation. Somebody said to me, wow, that was so wise. And I'm thinking, it was. I wish it had been my wisdom, but it really wasn't. It was the wisdom of the Lord that he just dumped into me. And so I think that we have to look at what we consider our inadequacies, and we have to let that go and see that he is always adequate. We just need to be available. That's the first lesson. The second lesson is that, and I never really paid attention to this, Jesus does this miracle. He prays for these fish. He blesses them. He breaks the bread. But he doesn't dispense the miracle. He hands it to his disciples to dispense. Now think about that for a second. My first thought, I've always read that, I'm like, okay, great, they're doing, helping out Jesus by dispensing this food. But what really struck me when I was reading it this time was how many times he actually performs the miracle and gives it to us to dispense. We don't think about that too often. I'm not responsible for the miracles. I'm responsible for being available for him to do the miracle, which means I might pray for somebody I feel totally inadequate to pray for. I can't even number the times that I have prayed for somebody with almost no faith of my own to see God do something miraculous in them. To my surprise, I rarely feel adequate enough to minister to people. I don't know how to address issues or problems in a way that is good until I let the Lord do it through me. And that's the second lesson, is that we just have to be available. We have to make ourselves available. In this day and this time, right now, the world is in chaos. We've got the virus going on. We've got racist issues going on. We have liberal issues going on. I mean, constantly there are things that are just causing so much turmoil around here. People don't know what to do. And yet, Jesus is the answer. We know that. Jesus is the answer to everything. But we are the dispensers. He uses us to dispense his truth to this world. That means that we get to come alongside, and maybe I don't know what to say to this person who has no hope at the moment, who doesn't know God, but if I wait on the Lord in that moment and pray, he will give me what it is to say, and all I need to do is be available. Think about these two things. I think that there is more than enough situations all around us every day that God gives us the opportunity to dispense his miracles, his truth, his word, his love, his compassion, his mercy. We have to be available to do so. And the truth is, we are all inadequate to do the job. But it's not about our inadequacy. It's about his adequacy. He is adequate for any situation. And if we are available, he will use us that way. Love you all. You take care.